Hi everyone, it's me, Crafty Witch. Welcome back to my channel. So I'm on a roll today with making videos. So here's another one. I grew up in a culture that has a very strong oral tradition. And part of that also includes, like, winter time is our storytelling time. That is typically the time when we would gather, share our ghost stories, our paranormal stories, like things like that. And we would sit around and tell these stories from one generation to the next. And I can remember as a child, we'd be playing, like, say I'm some of my cousins or whatever, and the adults would be like usually in the kitchen. They'd be making their tea and maybe having some cookies or little snacks, and then they would just naturally fall into a conversation of telling, like, ghost stories, paranormal type stories. And it was like the Pied Piper. They didn't have to call us to come join them. We'd be playing, and then we'd hear, and then we would just quietly go and join the adults and kind of sit by their feet and look up at them as they told all these stories. And I can even remember my kids being like that too. It's a nice practice, and I found it very nice. Anyway, so now, like, all of in my personal family, like all my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, like everybody's deceased. And so I'm in that old generation now. And now that I'm pushing 50 years old, like I'll be 47 this year. And it's kind of like, you're kind of in that position now. And I notice now that younger people will start coming to me for, they want to hear some of these old stories. And sometimes even my kids, we get together and we sit around, and now it's in our living room, sometimes in our kitchen, and we go back to telling those old stories again. And it's a nice way to stay connected to your past and to your family line, and it's really nice. So anyway, I thought I would share some of these stories with you guys. You may not believe them, and that's fine. Some of them might sound really far-fetched, but these are all things that my family members or friends of ours have experienced, and I thought I'd share them with you. So I don't know how many videos I'll be making. I'll try to include as many as I can. So during World War II, my grandmother bought a piece of land. And so she bought a piece of farmland, and there was like nothing on that land. Like, there was no buildings, no nothing. And at the time, they stayed about maybe a mile and a half, 2 kilometers away on another piece of land. And at that time, it was owned by an English family, and their last name was Barefoot, and they're a very kind family. It was a husband and wife, and I always thought that they were natives, because when I was growing up, like, they would say Mr. and Mrs. Barefoot, and to me, like, I pictured, like, like a grizzly bear and the barefoot kind of thing. But their last name was actually Barefoot, and they were from England, and they were very kind people, and they were very kind to my grandparents. And my grandfather was like a farmhand for Mr. Barefoot, and would help him on his farm kind of thing. So they let my grandparents, my Coco and Mushum, stay on a little section of their land while they were in the process of trying to build their own little cabin on their own farm that my grandmother bought. Okay. So this is just to set the scene for you. Now, my Uncle Ivan was a young chap at the time, and my grandmother had sent him and one of his friends to go over to the farm that she had bought, and to start, like, chopping down some logs, chopping down some trees. And when they were done that, they were to come back. So now it was getting towards supper time or whatever. It was starting to get late. So they decided to, go back. And they were on horseback in those days. So he rode his horse back, and with his friend, they were both on horses. So they ride back to where my grandparents were. My grandmother notices that my Uncle Ivan didn't bring back the axe. We had a big long-handled axe. He didn't bring that back. And she's like, where's my axe? And he's like, well, I left it over like on the other parcel of land. And she's like, oh no, you didn't, kind of thing. You better go over there and you go bring that axe back, because what if somebody finds it and takes it? Like, they're not cheap. And, you know, she didn't have the kind of money to be spending on replacing an axe in case it gets stolen. So she gave him hell, and he had to go on his horse back to get that axe that was over on the other piece of land. And so his buddy went with him. So they go back. He finds the axe where he had left it, and like, he's grumbling, like, he's kind of bitchy, right? Like, he's kind of mad, like, you know, nobody's going to come over here, and, you know, I'm going to come back tomorrow. What's the big deal? I could have just left it here, blah, blah, blah. So he loads up the axe, he gets back on his horse, and then they were going to head back to, like, where their parents were, like where my grandparents were. And this old looking ancient native man with like long white hair, just on foot, started chasing them. They were on horseback. My uncle and his friend were on horseback. And this native guy appeared out of nowhere, dressed like in buckskin from like head to toe from like long time ago. He had some kind of like knife that he held up. And my uncle and his friend were on horses. They had really fast horses. And this ghost, this man, was chasing them, holding this knife, and was like running right behind the horses. Like, the horses couldn't get away from this entity, this spirit. And whenever my uncle would look back, that old man was like literally right behind them. And like, my uncle was terrified. And there was like this old, they call it Highway 9 or whatever, that ghost or whatever chased them all the way up to that highway, and then didn't cross after that. And they came back to where my grandparents were, and like, the horses were completely winded. My Uncle Ivan was like terrified. His friend was terrified. His friend stayed the night because he didn't want to ride home, because now it's getting like, it's dusk, like it's darker than dusk, like it's gonna get really dark soon, kind of thing. So his friend spent the night, and they told him what had happened. So that was the one ghost story. Another ghost story, I'm trying to keep track of the time here, it's got 8 minutes so far. Another ghost story is with my my mushum, which means grandfather in Cree. My mushum, he had a twin brother named Alexander, and they used to just call him Sandy. And to kind of get an idea about my grandfather and his twin, what kind of personalities they had a very kind of a devil-may-care type of attitude. They didn't get afraid easily. They were both in World War One and World War Two. Like, they saw a lot of stuff. They experienced a lot of things, and they always had a smile on their faces and always liked to laugh and joke, and they're just awesome people. So anyway, Sandy, this one night, was coming back from Yorkton, going out to the farm, and he didn't have a horse and he didn't have a vehicle, so he would walk, and it was a bright moonlight night, and he would also like jog, and he could see everything around him fine. And then so he was jogging in the dark, heading back to the farm, and then, hey Chansey, you trying to join in here? And then so when he was jogging, he could hear something running behind him. And then so he would slow down and walk, and then he could hear this thing, something walking behind him. But he wouldn't turn around to look at what it was. And then if he started to jog again, then this thing would run behind him. And then if he walked, it would walk. And that was happening for like 10 miles before they got to the farm. And at one point he stopped and there was like a log or something. And then he sat down on this log and this thing sat beside him about a foot or two away from him. And my Uncle Sandy looked at it and it had like a hood and kind of like a robe, and it sat there and it didn't say anything. And it didn't turn to look at like my uncle. He just looked at it, and then he said, he said to this thing, he was like, "That was quite the jog we had." And the thing nodded its head like that, just silent, just nodded its head. And then Uncle Sandy was like, "Just wait till I get my second wind and we'll go again." And like he had no fear. Like he was just so nonchalant about it. So that is one of the ghost stories that still to this day is often retold with our family. Another one actually involved, well, it's about my mom's friend. So back in the day, my mom's friend had to share a bedroom with her sister, and they lived out in the country, and her sister was going to sneak off to go to an old-time country dance and had left the window open and had told her sister, like, don't lock the window, don't close the window, because I'm going to come back and sneak in, and don't tell mom and dad, kind of thing. So mom's friend was like, yeah, okay. And her sister goes to this dance. And then sometime during the night, mom's friend, I think her name was Marilyn, like, you know, feels a bit of a chill, and then she kind of wakes up a little bit. She's like, oh gosh, I wonder what time it is. It's getting kind of chilly. So then she reached back, because they slept in the same bed, right? So then she reached behind her, and she could feel like this ice cold face behind her, and she was like half asleep, and she's like, oh, my poor sister's so cold. So then she grabbed the blankets and covered this thing up, and thinking it was her sister, and then she went back to sleep. Well, her sister didn't get home till the next morning, and got into supreme shit, I guess, by their parents. And they never did know or figure out what it was that had crawled into bed with Marilyn, and what it was that Marilyn felt. But according to Marilyn, she could feel an ice cold face behind her on the pillow. She just assumed it was her sister that had gotten into bed with her, and that's must have been what woke her up. And then when she reached across and felt this ice cold face, she thought, oh, my sister is back, she's cold, I'm just going to cover her up. But it wasn't her sister at all. So that's another story. Oh, then there was one that I experienced. This is years ago, probably like, I don't know, in the 90s. Maybe early 2000s, somewhere in there. I'm not too sure. And I'm at my mom's place, and at the time, my mom used to get up really early in the morning. Well, I shouldn't say really early. She'd be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. She had a commute an hour to go to work and stuff, so she'd get up early to make sure she made it to work on time. So anyway, I was at mom's visiting with her, and there's no running water out there. There's no indoor plumbing, right? So there was a little wash basin, and there was a water bucket, and there was a ladle, and you would scoop the water and you'd pour it into the basin, and you'd wash your hands in the basin. So it was in the middle of the night, and I could hear like somebody monkeying around in the kitchen, and I could hear like somebody like getting the ladle. You could hear it, you know, being taken off. It was on a little nail on the wall, and like scooping the water and pouring the water into the basin. And so then I got up to see who it was. Like, who else would it be? It's mom, right? That's what I'm thinking. And I go and I stand in the doorway, and I'm looking at this person, and I looked at the time. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and this person had a long white nightgown on, and their hair was brought like forward like this, so I couldn't tell how long or short their hair was. And they had their back to me, and they were just standing there washing their hands in the basin. And I just looked at them, or this person, this female, and thinking in my head, oh, it's my poor mom. She must have had to go to the bathroom. She's just washing her hands. And normally if we met like that in the middle of the night, we would talk. You know, maybe have a cigarette together, because I used to smoke at the time. Have a cigarette, and then go back to bed. But then when I looked at the time, I thought, she has to be up in 3 hours. I'm just going to let her go back to bed. And I turned around and I went back to bed. So then the next day when I talked to my mom, I was like, so you got up in the middle of the night? And she's like, no. And I was like, but I saw you washing your hands at the sink. You were wearing a long white nightgown. And Mom's like, my nightgown's like pink. And she's like, no, I never got up in the middle of the night. And so I shared what had happened. And she's like, that wasn't me. So that was another little ghost story. What else is there? There's quite a few. I'm just seeing how we are for time. Okay, there was another time, and it was at my mom's out in the country, and we were in the pink bedroom. There was the blue bedroom, the pink bedroom. They were on the main floor. And the one window faced west, and my ex-husband was there, and it was nighttime, and then everybody's going to bed, and then laying there, and he's still awake and I'm awake, and then I could hear knock knock knock, like on the wall, like where our head was, which was right underneath the window, which is ground level. Right? And I was like, what? So then I would knock back, and then it would knock, and then it started to be like a fun game. And I would, you do that, like, and then it would answer. And I was like, oh my God, do you hear that? And I got all excited, right? So I'm telling this to my ex-husband, who's like, his eyes are massive and they're huge. And I was like, do you hear that? And it was like, and so we were playing this knocking game, me and this thing, we're knocking back and forth to each other. And like, he's looking at me and he's just terrified. His eyes are huge. And he's like, did you ever stop to consider what was on the other side of the wall knocking? And then I looked at him and I was like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of freaky stuff around here. No, I didn't. And then it would keep on knocking, trying to get me to play with it. And then I was too scared. I didn't keep knocking. I was like, no, I'm done playing games. I'm not knocking no more. That was freaky. But it was a very cool experience. And I was just amazed. But I didn't look out the window to see what it was. I don't think I'd want to know. I don't know. I think I do want to know what it was, but a part of me also doesn't want to know in case it was something like totally scary. But yeah, that was a pretty cool experience. What else? Oh yeah, there was another experience regarding a shapeshifter in our family. So there's this one fellow that was related to us through my grandfather's side of the family, and he was a shapeshifter, and he could turn into a black dog. And my grandmother and grandfather, I mean, he would go and visit them and that kind of thing. And my mom used to tell me stories about him, and she said, like, when she was a little girl, she did not like him. She thought he was creepy. She didn't like his eyes, and she just didn't like him. But there would be like a massive blizzard snowstorm happening, and he would arrive at your place in the middle of the blizzard on foot out in the country, and they'd ask him, well, where did you come from? And he'd be all sweaty, and it's like 40 below outside kind of thing, and he'd be sweating, and he's like, oh, I just came from, and he would, maybe list off a town that was like, 15, 20 miles away kind of thing. And they'd be like, well, how did you get here? And he's like, oh, I cut cross country. And they're like, how? And then there were stories of like that he would leave, so then my grandfather and my uncle, they would go and track him, and his footprints they'd start off as human, and then they would turn into canine footprints, and there would be no more human footprints. It would just turn into canine footprints in the snow. So, yep, there's that. What else? We're at 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop here and then I'll do another part 2. Okay, ciao.